have 20 minutes for a general discussion, and immediately I open the floor to all of you. If we try to be synthetic, many more people will participate to the general discussion. Please, who wants to? Please, Marcelo, put on the audio.
Yeah, the four most important words in Mundo Zoom are, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Terrific synthetic papers this afternoon. Marianne, I have a question for you. So reading is, there's no gene for reading. It's epigenetic. Some 6,000 years ago, we began writing and reading. And there is now a corpus of scholarship that is very substantial on reading and its consequences. And you have been at the forefront of articulating. My observation really addresses the question of the brain plasticity and the matter of what became very clear to me in my years in California, working very, very closely with some of the architects of these new technologies. And that is the addictive components here. So could you reflect a little bit about this issue, especially during the formative moments in the evolution, in the development of the human brain, the development of self and other regulation, the entire apparatus of socio-emotional self-regulation. Could you comment about the issue of addiction? Because this is something that I think is so central, especially when we're talking about children and emerging adults. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcelo. If we stick to the 3 minutes each, we will allow many more people to participate. Who is next? Oh, another Marcelo and Sister Helen.
Another Marcelo, another Chancellor. So I want to know the relation of truth in all these papers. I don't see any in relation of what is the right of truth, because this is the question. We have today in the culture of fake truth. So what we have some right of truth. That is, we have many rights, but the right of truth, what is the question? So this is my problem also, because we have another meeting about this. So maybe we need to make some connection with this meeting with the other meeting. Please,
thank you. Thank you, Marcelo. Sister Helen.
Thank you very much, and thank you for some very interesting, stimulating papers. I don't really have a question. I have a sort of reflection, and I think I've said some things like this before in some of the other meetings of the Academy. I'm always struck when we have these discussions about technology that people always emphasize what is so new. And if you read most books about this stuff, people are talking about, you know, the unprecedented nature, and I mean that's not unreal, but I think it's quite mistaken to look at this without remembering how much of this is part of a history that we can study to help us understand what's going on now. I think, unfortunately, we have in society as a whole, and technologists are the first group that don't do this. We don't think about technology in historical terms. We think a little bit about the history of science, but not much. We think much more about history of other parts of life, or history of literature, or history. But history of technology is something that's really not very studied very much, and I think we need to keep it in mind. I mean, I'll just give you one example, and I think I've mentioned him before. I think there's a lot of very interesting stuff that's come out of anthropological research to help us understand technology. And there's a rather old book now, but I think it has a lot of interesting material still, Technics and Civilization, Lewis Mumford's book. And he would talk about basically two forms of technological development that we've had throughout human history. One of which he calls biotechnics, which is long before biotechnology. The whole idea is that it's a form of technological development which is inserted into a way of life. So the way of life is the kind of frame, and the technology functions within that. And he gives various examples of it. He gives a lot of examples, for instance, from Neolithic period, of the kinds of technological developments at that time. But then there's another type, which he calls monotechnic. And that's looks like the machine is beginning to dominate in some way. We see that a lot in the Industrial Revolution. He would argue that the creation of the system to build the pyramids is the first known example in history of that, where the pharaohs create this machine, which is actually made out of people, what he calls a mega machine. But what's characteristic here all the time in all these forms of it is one group of people controlling another group of people through the machine. And I think that, you know, a lot of the criticisms that we've heard today in what Joseph said about media, in what, sorry, I missed some of your names,
Yes.
Very interesting stuff about colonialism, Nicholas, yeah. You know, a lot of people that we have this sort of background. If we look at the capitalistic system and that, there's certain people who are controlling what's going on here, and they're hiding away behind the technology to some extent. They're trying to say, look, this is the way technology develops.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's a problem.
Yeah, fine.
Who is next? Please.
No, I finished. It's
Yeah, you have finished. Please. Who raised the hand before? Disappeared. He or she did.
The Mexican, no?
Who? No, I noticed the name.
Lopez.
Yeah? Fausto Colombo?
No.
Yes. Did you ask Fausto Colombo?
No. So,
No,
che,
però
che cominciano a rispondere. Che
Yeah.
sta parlando ma non si sente.
No,
No, we cannot hear Fausto. You have to
Non
put the
vuole-
audio on.
No, ha detto di no.
No, okay.
Che cominciano a
Now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Just a very short consideration, two very short considerations. The first
Yes.
one is that I send you a quote which came spontaneously after the Marianne's talk by Shimu Sene. It's a very good poem about contemplation. I'm sure that you know very well it, but it's just a quote. The second one is coming after Ellen Alford, a very interesting comment. I think that another thing that we have to consider is the time of adaptation. When we talk about new technologies, new technological organization, it's like the time society and human being in general need to adapt, to interpret, and to change and shape the technology is longer than the time of development of technology itself. So what we are considering is a time of change. What I say adaptation is not a passive adaptation, but also an active adaptation to that.
Thank you.
About laws and so on. It's just a consideration.
Thank you, Fausto. Anybody else? Otherwise, we will leave the remaining minutes to the presenters if they want to react to this. Joe, would you like to say something as a response to?
Sure. Let me. I thought the set of presentations fit well together. The two comments I want to make is that the view that markets would lead to a socially efficient, social welfare maximizing outcome was, which was Adam Smith's view, although he didn't even agree with that, is what we've learned in the last 50, 60 years is the conditions under which that's true are extraordinarily restrictive. And that it is not a surprise that with the new technologies that there is a rising market power, and that the pursuit of profits, which is a number of people talked about, does not lead to societal welfare, but just to the maximization of profits and exploitation. But there's a more recent literature in economics that addresses or attacks one of the standard assumptions, which is that preferences are fixed. That is one of the standard assumptions goes back. And I think the last presentation is very enlightening in making us think not only are preferences not fixed, but human abilities and capacities are not fixed and are endogenous, are changing with our technology. So finally, let me observe that one way of thinking about what is going on, just a speculation, is that there is there's always been an evolutionary process that we change in response to ability to learn, to agriculture. I mean, all these things. But we are now in a new stage of evolution where we've created a technology that could, in fact, change us in fundamental ways. And not only change us individually, but the way our society functions. And there's one more dimension to it, which the discussion of sensors highlights. And that is that not only are these AI robots able to sense things, but they become, they learn and they can be self-motivated. They can determine, they become, in a sense, sentient is not the right word, but they make decisions. And in that sense, they are very much like any other actor in our society. They make decisions based on the information that they've gotten in and their program, and then they evolve. So we need to contemplate the possibility that we've created something that in one sense could replace us, or certainly is going to interact with us.
Thank you.
So just one final comment, which is, as we think about all this, we have to ask the question, is the direction in which that's going, that evolution, the direction that we want to go?
Yeah.
And if it isn't, how do we reshape that direction?
We would need meta preferences. Anybody else who wants to intervene? Pierpaolo, do you want to say something? Or please, go ahead. Nick.
Just reacting to what Stiglitz said.
Yes.
He concluded his remarks by saying that technologies make decisions, and therefore they are like other actors in society. But there is a big and deep difference between humans and the technologies in making decisions. This is not an analogy. I mean, technologies can make decisions, but they do that in a very, very different way in respect to humans. So I think that we should distinguish between making decisions through the technologies and through human beings.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just say that Cardinal Giambattista Re just joined us in this occasion. He's the Dean of the Cardinal. What's the technical name, Marcelo? He's the Dean of the Cardinal College. Yes. So thank you. But I think that Nick wanted to say something. Please.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to comment on three things from the questions, and there's been so much commonality between the papers. The point about the right of truth is very fundamental, because I think, and many philosophers have said this, societies cannot be healthy unless they subsidize the circulation of truth in some way. So we have to face the challenge that we now have very, very powerful corporations, some of the most largest scale in the world, whose business model is aimed in subsidizing the circulation, regardless of truth. In fact, since bad information circulates faster than good information, and the psychological evidence to show this, they actually have an interest in the circulation of bad information.
Yeah.
That's a really important thing we cannot not address if we want to believe that we live in healthy societies, let alone democracies. It's even tougher if we want a democracy. So that's the first thing. The second thing about history, the very important point that Helen made, yes, I completely agree. That's exactly why I offered the colonial way of reflecting. Most history of platforms relates to the past 20, 30 years. That is not the point. It's 500 years at a minimum that we need to look at to understand the consistency of forms of power. The technology is a means of power, and it's being used today to appropriate the assets of the earth in radically new ways, this time through data. So I think that's absolutely important, but there's just one caveat to that, was that sometimes we do have to acknowledge there are moments in history when forces configure in such a way that a genuinely new possibility emerges. And that's what I think we're in at the moment, just as that happened around about 1492, when a new world, so-called, suddenly appeared, and there was a lot more resources to play with. That was a changing point in history. And I think we're in the middle of another one now. So the question is, what is the change? And this relates to what Professor Stiglitz was just saying. How is it possible that sensors are embedded everywhere, that now business communication spreads so fast and so on? These things are going on, they're changing markets. I think the fundamental thing is so simple, we almost miss it. And this for me is the contribution of social theory, to ask these very simple questions about that society is now made stitched together in a different way. Before it was stitched together body to body, city to city, place to place. Now it's stitched together, as Graham pointed out, point in space to other point in space, because every point in space has a sensor built into it, a computer with a memory, which communicate with every other point. That creates an exponential increase in connection, which therefore creates an exponential increase in the possibilities of government or malevolent power.
Thank you.
And that means society is radically different. It's not the same society anymore. We need to address that.
Yes, thank you very much. Now, following a democratic rule, if you feel like that, spending another few minutes, I am ready. But now we have reached the 6 p.m. And so that was the closing time for our session. But we will have time tomorrow. Marianne, you want to add something?
I just want to very quickly respond to Marcelo's direct question and to the other Marcelo's indirect question about truth. And that is that there is an absolutely evolutionary reason for why these gamers, the technical people who are making design, they are using what is called the novelty reflex. And so we have a frontal lobe that inhibits, that grows and matures over time. But as young children, they have no inhibition. So they are completely at, if you will, subject to this novelty reflex, and they move in a most distracted way, which adds to the capacity to be addicted to constant stimulation. You add to that our designers of games and many, many different other aspects in the internet are using principles we know that are called intermittent reinforcers. So they are literally using design principles to addict. And Tristan Harris likens this moment to the moment the tobacco industry knew nicotine addicted, but didn't do anything about it. We know we have addiction as a real problem, and we are doing too little about it, which is part of this conference, and I'm so glad to be part of it. The last thing I'll say is in terms of Chancellor Marcello's comment about truth, I really wanted to actually talk much more about that in critical analysis, because truth is an aspect of what our brain either develops to evaluate or fails to evaluate. And so it is, if you will, to use Thomas, it is a virtue to inculcate studiousness in our children, because it's that critical analysis plus empathy, which will play one of the great roles about truth as part of our society. That's a virtue and a necessity.
Thank you. That is the ethics of virtues. Okay, a return to that. Thank you. So, unless there is any other people wanted to say something, I declare closed today's question. We will see each other tomorrow at the same time, and then the third day. So, thank you very much for all of you, and many of you. Have a nice day.